Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into one of the strangest, most surveilled, and most quietly rebellious lives in American history. The frontier schoolteacher, a teenage girl in a sod building on the Nebraska plains, regulated down to her bedtime, pursued by every unmarried man in a 3-county radius, and somehow still outrunning all of it. Not the one-room schoolhouse of warm sepia paintings, not the sweet spinster with the apple on her desk. We're going into the version where the contract specifies an 8 o'clock bedtime in ink, where the school board chairman shares your dinner table because his wife is your landlady this month, and where Sarah Leach got cited in Abilene in 1872 for being observed in conversation with a Texas drover for a period exceeding 1 hour. If this sounds like your kind of midnight historical rabbit hole, take a moment to like the video and subscribe only if deadpan frontier absurdity reliably puts you under. And huge thanks to whoever in this comment section requested the schoolteachers. I hope you're already horizontal, which, per the contract, you legally should be by 8. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. If it's past 8, the board will be in touch. Dim the lights. Turn on a fan for that soft white noise hum. Get comfortable. Tuck the quilt under your chin. And maybe keep your dancing shoes somewhere less conspicuous just in case a school board member checks. Have you ever wondered what it costs to keep 30 children alive, warm, and literate on a Kansas prairie for $40 less per month than the man who did it the year before? How did you run a classroom where your oldest student is barely 2 years younger than you and significantly taller? Could you survive a morality contract that was also, technically, your lease, your diet plan, and your social calendar? What happened when the cowboy left a folded note on the corner of your desk and you knew exactly what it said, and also knew exactly who was watching? The secret marriage, did it count as one if the husband lived on a separate homestead in a different county? Did the board know? Did the landlady? And seriously, what was the 8 p.m. bedtime supposed to stop? Congratulations. You just woke up in Custer County, Nebraska, 1887. The stove is cold, it's still dark, and the school board member whose barn you're currently sleeping above is already awake and has opinions. Good luck. You are 19 years old, and it is 4 in the morning, and the iron stove in the middle of the schoolhouse has been cold for 9 hours. You are standing in the dark with an armful of kindling, a tin pail of water you carried half a mile from the well, and a small wax candle pinched between 2 fingers. The board pays you, in theory, to teach. In practice, the teaching is the last thing on the list. Before the children arrive, you are the janitor, the woodcutter, the water hauler, and the only person here. The schoolhouse is sod. 18 feet by 24 feet, which is roughly the size of a generous parking space, except this one contains 32 children, 1 stove, 2 rows of benches, and your entire professional life. The walls are cut prairie grass packed into bricks and stacked into something that approximates a building. In summer they breathe cool, in winter they sweat frost on the inside. The windows are oiled paper, not glass, paper, dipped in lard and tacked flat, which lets in a thin grey approximation of light and keeps out a thin grey approximation of wind. It does its best. Let's talk about the stove. It's not a stove, it's a negotiation. You coax the kindling, then the split wood, then you wait, hands flattened against the iron casing, listening for the shift from reluctant smoke to actual heat. The stove has opinions about mornings, strong ones. Some mornings it cooperates. Other mornings it sits there radiating cold judgment while the room stays at the same temperature as the Nebraska sky, which today is not a hospitable temperature. You do not have a second option. The children arrive at 8. The stove will be warm by 8. Your contract specifies your duties as a teacher. It does not specify the stove. It does not specify the water. It does not specify the sweeping, which happens every morning with a broom that loses 3 bristles a week and has not been replaced since 1879. These tasks exist in the contract the same way most invisible labour exists, as obvious, unpaid, and somebody else's problem until they become yours. You earn $26 a month. The man who taught here before you earned 44. The board considers this fair. The board is not here at 4 in the morning. The walk from your boarding family's farmhouse to the schoolhouse was a 1/4 mile of frozen rut. You know every rut. You know which one catches your left boot, which one fills with standing water when it thaws, Which stretch of fence post marks the halfway point where you can see the dark shape of the school building against the slightly lighter dark of the sky? Marta Schreiber, whose husband, Heinrich, sits on the school board, left a corn cake on the stove last night wrapped in cloth. It is still there on the corner of the teacher's desk. Cold, a little dry, sincerely meant. You eat half of it before the kindling catches. By 6:30 the room holds a thin wedge of warmth around the stove and a determined cold along the far wall where the two youngest Tolliver boys will sit and pretend to read their primers. By 7, the paper windows glow a weak amber. By 7:30, you have swept, arranged the slates, written the first arithmetic problem on the board in chalk that snaps if you press too hard, and settled into the teacher's chair, which is a regular chair that the previous teacher left, and which has one leg slightly shorter than the others. You've learned to sit still. The chair has learned to tolerate you. It's a professional relationship. You sign your name on a single sheet of paper in a parlor in Saline County, Kansas, and the paper becomes the next 6 months of your life. The chairman of the school board is sitting across the table with his hat on his knee. His wife is the woman who will board you the first 3 weeks of the term. The clauses on the page are typed in small, even rows. They govern your bedtime, your church attendance, your conversation with men, and your right to walk into town after dark. Let's talk about what you've just signed. The contract forbids marriage during the term. It forbids courtship without explicit board permission. It forbids attendance at dance halls. It forbids alcohol and tobacco and missing Sunday services. One clause, near the bottom, specifies that you are to be inside and retired by 8 o'clock in the evening. 8 o'clock. The chairman doesn't mention this clause. He doesn't need to. You've already read it twice. The man across from you is Harold Pfeiffer. He farms 160 acres 3 miles east of town, runs a small dry goods concern out of a converted shed, and sits in the third pew at First Methodist every Sunday. He is also the person legally authorized to dismiss you this week, next week, and every week through April. His wife Clara will serve you salt pork and cornbread tonight at their table. She will also be watching. This is basically a small-town HOA, except they handle hiring, surveillance, and your love life simultaneously, and Harold is the entire board of directors. The wage line reads $26 per month. You know, because someone told you, that the man who taught here last year, before he left for a better post in Topeka, earned $42. The contract doesn't comment on this discrepancy. The contract has never commented on this discrepancy. You sign anyway, because $26 is $26, and the alternative is your father's farm. Clause 7 names dance halls. Clause 7 also names barn dances, hotel socials, and any event at which the announced purpose is dancing. The clause is shorter than the clause about firewood. Miss Eugenia Taft, who had this post before you, the family at the Henleys mentioned her, attended a social at the Grange Hall last October. Not a dance hall, a Grange Hall. She was observed in conversation with a man named Webb for approximately 40 minutes. The board met on a Tuesday. She was gone by Thursday. The record lists the reason as conduct inconsistent with the moral expectations of the district. The record does not list Webb. You fold the signed contract and slide it back across the table. Harold picks it up without looking at it and tucks it into his coat pocket, which is where 6 months of your life now lives. Clara appears from the kitchen doorway holding a pitcher, moving with the quiet confidence of a woman who has rehearsed this exact moment before. She sets the pitcher down. She doesn't make eye contact. She pours. The clause about bedtime is 8 o'clock. You are 19 years old. The clause was written by men who are, to a one, still awake at 8 o'clock. It is 7:58 inches the evening, and you are sitting on the foot of a straw mattress in a borrowed room, lacing the front of your nightdress. Your landlady is standing in the hallway with a lamp, watching the line of light under your door. Your contract specifies bedtime at 8. You did not negotiate this clause. You did not know this clause was negotiable. The clause has been there since the contract was drafted in 1873, and you are the 7th teacher to initial beside it. Let's talk about the boarding round. Every 2 to 4 weeks, you move. You pack your trunk, one trunk, everything, and relocate to the home of a different student's family. The Hoffmans feed you salt pork and dried beans and watch you with the mild interest of people who have not had much new to look at recently. The Gretkis give you a pallet near the kitchen stove and a hook on the wall for your coat. You sleep under quilts made from flour sacks. You eat what they eat. You sit where they tell you to sit. There is no private domestic space to speak of, which is basically Airbnb, except your host is also your employer and reports your lamp usage to the school board on Monday. You don't have a room, you have a corner. The corner is wherever you've been put this fortnight, and it belongs to someone else entirely, their house, their schedule, their opinion about what time you should be unconscious. The lamp gets blown out when they blow their lamp out. The conversation stops when they run out of interest. Your trunk sits at the foot of the bed like a small, brown and reliably patient animal. You have been the teacher for 11 days, and already you can feel the edges of yourself going soft at the borders. Meanwhile, the school board has opinions. 3 to 5 men, a wheat farmer, a feed merchant, possibly a rancher whose son sits in the 3rd row. They meet in someone's parlour, with someone's wife bringing coffee, and they discuss you. Not unkindly, just thoroughly. One of them ate dinner at the Gretke table last Thursday and sat directly across from you while you passed the bread. He noted that you laughed twice, which he found appropriate. He is authorized to dismiss you. The bread does not know any of this. No one announces that you're being watched. Miss us. Gretke pours your coffee in the morning and asks pleasantly whether you slept well, and you say yes, and she nods. And on Wednesday she will mention to Harold Pfeiffer at church that the lamp went out at 8:01 on Tuesday, which is a perfectly normal thing to say to a man who is also her brother-in-law. There is no formal surveillance apparatus, because there does not need to be. You are inside someone's home, at someone's table, eating someone's cornbread, and the someone has known Harold Pfeiffer personally for 19 years. The arrangement does its work without anyone ever calling it what it is. A farmhand named Werner Bowles passes you after church on Sunday and removes his hat. He says good morning. You say good morning. The exchange takes 4 seconds. By Tuesday, 2 women in the congregation have mentioned it to their husbands, which is genuinely impressive velocity for information moving without a telegraph. Werner Bowles is 26, has a homestead claim on 160 acres 2 miles east, and has no idea he has just generated paperwork. You have not told him there's paperwork. There isn't paperwork yet. There will be, if he removes his hat again. The contract has a clause about keeping company with men. It requires board permission. The form for requesting permission does not exist, which means the process for requesting it is a conversation, which means the conversation is with Harold Pfeiffer, sitting in his parlour, explaining that a man removed his hat at you. You will not be having that conversation. Werner Bowles will have to keep his hat on. Back in the borrowed room, it is now 8:02. The line of light under your door has gone dark. Your landlady has retreated, satisfied. You lie on the straw mattress and listen to the house settle, which it does loudly and with great conviction, as though the boards have things to say and have been waiting all day to say them. Outside, somewhere across the frozen Kansas dark, there are men playing cards and drinking and sitting up until whatever hour they feel like sitting up until. Their bedtimes are not in writing anywhere. Nobody's watching their lamp. You move every 3 weeks. On a Sunday afternoon, you fold your 2 dresses, your hairbrush, and your small bundle of letters from home into a single carpet bag and walk it across town to a different farmhouse. The system is called boarding round. It rotates you through the homes of every family whose children sit in your classroom. You do not have a room of your own. You have an arrangement, renewed by the calendar, with strangers who are also your employers, your neighbours, and the parents of your students. The bed is different every rotation. Sometimes it's a real bed with a cornhusk mattress and a quilt patched from flour sacks. Sometimes it's a curtained-off corner of the main room, which is also the kitchen, which is also where the family eats, argues, and occasionally delivers a calf. The curtain has a gap. The curtain has always had a gap. You develop, within your first month, a policy of simply facing the wall. Let's talk about breakfast. You eat it at a table with the family whose children you teach, whose husband sits on the board that reviews your conduct, whose wife has already made her own assessment of your character based on how quickly you finished the cornbread last Tuesday. A school board member sharing your dinner table is the standard arrangement, not the exception. He passes you the salt. He is also authorized to dismiss you before dessert. You pass the salt back. The boarding round has a logic. It distributes the cost of your housing across the district, since most boards can't afford to add a cash housing allowance to a salary that's already running between $20 and $35 a month. What you receive instead is a rotating series of straw mattresses and the social architecture of a family that isn't yours. You're basically Airbnb, except your host is also your boss and reports your bedtime to HR. The bedtime, in case you've forgotten, is 8 o'clock. It's in the contract. The family knows. Mrs. Hrubesh, at the third household, a Czech farm wife with 7 children and an opinion about everything, sets a candle outside your curtain at 7:45, not to be cruel. As a reminder, the candle has the energy of a hall monitor. It just sits there, flame perfectly upright, monitoring. What you don't have, across every rotation, is privacy. There's nowhere to write a letter you wouldn't want read. Nowhere to sit with your thoughts that isn't also someone's parlour. The carpet bag moves with you and it contains everything you own that isn't the schoolhouse. You learn to keep your face the same from house to house, interested, cheerful, grateful for the cornbread, because the women compare notes after church and the men compare notes at the feed store, and both conversations have consequences for your contract. Fanny Eisel, teaching in Custer County in the late 1880s, received visits from a neighbouring farmer twice in 1 week while boarding with the Aldrich family. Mrs. Aldrich set an extra plate both times. The plate was a gesture of hospitality. It was also a very legible piece of information. The board issued a formal warning. Fanny finished her term, married the farmer that summer, and lost her position immediately. She had been boarder, employee, and romantic subject simultaneously in the same house, at the same table, for months. The plate had been watching the whole time. The rotation continues regardless. 3 weeks at the Aldrich place, 3 weeks at the Kowalski place, 3 weeks somewhere with a curtain that doesn't quite reach the floor. Your letters from home accumulate at the bottom of the carpet bag. You read them by candlelight before 8, which gives you approximately 1 hour after the children go to sleep and before the contract requires you to follow them. Mrs. Volkmer is making coffee in the kitchen at 6:30 inches the morning, and she is humming, and you understand from the way she is humming that something has been said. You came in at 9:15 last night from a temperance social at the Lutheran church. You signed the visitor's book. You spoke to no man. Mrs. Volkmer does not look at you when she pours the coffee. She does not need to. Her husband sits on the school board, and by Tuesday afternoon the board will know exactly which hour you came in. The contract says 8 p.m. It says this in ink, on a line, above your signature. You understood 8 p.m. to mean roughly 8 p.m., a spirit of the law situation. Mrs. Volkmer understands 8 p.m. to mean 8 p.m. The humming continues. Mr. Volkmer is on the board with the wheat farmer Pryor and the dry goods merchant Henderson. They meet on Tuesday afternoons in Pryor's parlour. They share a pew with you on Sunday. One of them is pouring coffee into your cup right now, by proxy, through his wife, who has not stopped humming since you came downstairs. They can dismiss you immediately. No hearing, no formal grievance structure. The contract lists the grounds, and the grounds are wide. Attending a dance, keeping company with a man, marrying, being seen in conversation with a Texas drover for a period exceeding 1 hour. Sarah Leach could tell you about that one. The Abilene board cited her in 1872, formally and by name, for exactly that conversation at the drover's cottage hotel. The drover was not cited. The drover went back to Texas. Miss Elspeth Gruber, who boards 2 rotations ahead of you with the Pfeiffer family on the county road south, has developed a system. She keeps a small notebook in her apron pocket. Every visitor, every errand, every minute past sundown is written in her own hand before Mrs. Pfeiffer can write it in hers. Elspeth tears the notebook page carefully when the entry is favourable and leaves it visible on the windowsill. The page is a preemptive alibi. The windowsill is a statement of intent. It's the most administrative romance has ever looked. The money sits behind everything. Female teachers in 1870s Kansas are earning $20 to $35 a month. Male teachers doing identical work are earning $40 to $60. Some districts don't pay in cash at all. They pay in scrip redeemable only at the local store, which is owned by the dry goods merchant who also sits on the board that issued the scrip. You sign for cornmeal in the same ledger Mr. Volkmer signs for nails. He greets you politely each time. The pencil he uses is short, sharp, and patiently resharpened. And so you drink the coffee. It's good coffee. Mrs. Volkmer is an excellent cook. Genuinely, whatever else she is. The kitchen smells of cornbread going cold and rendered lard and the particular sharp wood smoke that means the stove was fed pine this morning instead of oak. You will walk to the schoolhouse in 40 minutes. Light the iron stove yourself because that is also your job. Unpaid, haul water, sweep the packed earth floor, and by 7:45 stand at the door while 31 children file in past you in the dark. Mrs. Volkmer sets a plate of salt pork and bread on the table and finally looks at you. The look is not unkind. That's the thing about it. She is not your enemy. She has done this for 15 years with 4 previous teachers, 2 of whom married out and 2 of whom did not, and she remembers the names of all 4. She hums one more bar. You eat the salt pork. Tuesday is 3 days away. You are eating a plate of salt pork and biscuits at the long pine table in the Halsey farmhouse, and the man at the head of the table is the same man who, 6 weeks ago, signed your dismissal authorization in advance and locked it in the schoolhouse desk. He passes the butter. He asks how the Macready boy is doing with his ciphering. You answer truthfully. The butter dish has a small chip in the rim. You have been the teacher for 11 days. The board runs 3 to 5 men deep, depending on the district. Farmers, mostly. A merchant, sometimes. The Halsey farmhouse has a portrait of a very serious dog above the mantelpiece, and the man beneath it holds your teaching certificate, your housing, and your salary in the same closed fist. He isn't doing this to be menacing. He genuinely wants to know about the Macready boy. The Macready boy is his nephew. The board has no office, no posted hours, no formal channel through which a complaint travels before it reaches the man who decides. The complaint travels across this table, or after church when the coats are being collected, or on a Tuesday when Mr. Halsey and a 4-year-old wheat farmer named Elias happen to be repairing the same fence line. Elias has strong opinions about propriety and questionable ones about arithmetic. By the time you hear a concern has been raised, Elias has already filed it. You don't get a hearing. You get a warning, delivered with the cornbread, Mr. Denton, the merchant member, 2 seats down, refills his coffee and mentions he noticed you walking back from the post office yesterday around 4 in the afternoon. He says it pleasantly. He says you looked well. He does not say who else he noticed near the post office around 4 in the afternoon. You eat your biscuit. The biscuit knows something is happening. So do you. You rotate through the homes of your students' families every few weeks, which is basically Airbnb, except your host files a report and your checkout date is up to him. There is no room in this arrangement for privacy. A woman with no private address can be tracked by anyone who knows the rotation schedule, and everyone knows the rotation schedule because the board approved it. Mr. Halsey hands you the cornbread plate. You take a piece. The board doesn't think of itself as a surveillance operation. It thinks of itself as a community stewardship effort. Mr. Halsey he asked, would describe his work as protective, paternal, and quietly civic-minded. He is genuinely trying to keep the school's reputation intact by making sure the schoolteacher is in her borrowed bed before 8 o'clock on a Wednesday, which is, he will remind you, what the contract says. He believes this entirely. The contract also says no courtship without permission. The permission request goes to the board. The board discusses it. The board is having dinner with you. Mr. Denton saw you at the post office. The Halsey boy, who is 17 and very tall, and has been watching you explain long division for 11 days running, is sitting 4 feet away eating salt pork with his whole family and occasionally looking up. Nobody mentions this. The contract does not mention this either. The contract has several notable gaps. It is the end of the month, and you walk to the schoolhouse expecting an envelope of cash, and you receive instead a folded slip of paper signed by the district clerk. The slip is worth $22. It is redeemable, the slip explains, at Henderson's General Store on Main Street, and only at Henderson's General Store on Main Street. You cannot deposit it in the bank. You cannot send it home to your mother. You can exchange it for flour, calico, lamp oil, and 1 tin of saleratus. The scrip system works like a Starbucks gift card, except the card is your entire salary, and the only drink on the menu is cornmeal. Henderson's carries a respectable selection of dry goods, salt pork, dried beans, thread in 3 colours, and Henderson himself is, by most accounts, a perfectly agreeable man. He is also on the school board. The man who authorised the scrip is the same man you hand the scrip to. He gives you a small nod when he takes it. Professional courtesy. The number is 22. Female teachers in 1870s Kansas earn between $20 and $35 a month. Male teachers in the next district over Same room, same subjects, same 32 children, staring with varying degrees of comprehension. Earn 40 to 60. Mr. Pettigrew, in the school across the creek, signs for his $55 in cash on the first of every month. He has never had to ask Henderson what salaritus is. You are also, it should be noted, the janitor. The contract doesn't call it that. The contract just lists your responsibilities. Arrive before dawn, light the stove, haul water from the well, sweep the floor, and places them before the part about teaching. The stove is iron and reluctant. In January it takes 20 minutes to coax any heat out of it at all, and the windows are oiled paper, not glass, so the cold comes through with the cheerful persistence of an uninvited houseguest. You do this with cold hands, before sunrise, before the children arrive, before anyone is watching. The janitorial portion of your workday has no additional line item. Mrs. Aldrich at the boarding house, your current boarding house, the fourth one this term, sets your plate every evening with the careful neutrality of someone who has been asked to report on you and hasn't yet decided how thoroughly. She is watchful, polite, and reliably non-committal. She serves salt pork, dried beans, cornbread. The cornbread is good, the salt pork is present. There is a quilt on the bed made from flour sacks that have been washed until the lettering is almost gone, so that you fall asleep under the faint ghost of the words "Best Patent Winter Wheat" pressing softly into your cheek. The scrip doesn't cover postage. This is not an oversight. There are things you might send home in a letter that the district would prefer stayed local. Questions about other positions, inquiries to a normal school, a note to your sister about the wheat farmer in Section 12, who has ridden past the schoolhouse 4 times this week, in what he clearly believes is a casual manner. The envelope costs 3 cents. 3 cents is 1/8 of a pound of coffee at Henderson's. You write the letter anyway. You walk the long way to the post office, which is also Henderson's, and you hand it to Henderson directly, and Henderson gives you the small nod. Nora Taft, teaching in Saline County in the spring of 1878, received her February wages in scrip and her March wages in 2 bushels of winter wheat, a smoked ham, and a promissory note for the remainder, to be settled after harvest. She taught through April. She accepted the ham with the expression of a woman who has not yet decided if this is a grievance or just Tuesday. It was, by all available evidence, a Tuesday. The teacher in the next district over is named Mr. Pettigrew. He teaches the same number of children in the same kind of one-room schoolhouse, and he uses the same textbooks, and his contract is 1 page shorter than yours. His monthly salary is $55. Yours is $28. The board does not consider this a controversy. The board considers this an accurate reflection of 2 well-established facts, that you are a woman and that he is not. Mr. Pettigrew does not light the stove before dawn. A boy from one of the older families does it for $1 a month, a separate arrangement, a separate line item, entirely normal. You light your stove yourself, because when the board wrote your contract, they appended the janitorial duties to the bottom and simply did not assign a dollar amount to that section. The stove knows. You know, the board does not discuss it. $28 a month is, in purchasing terms, roughly the cost of 2 pairs of decent boots and a sack of cornmeal with something left over for thread. Annually, if the board pays you in cash, which is not guaranteed, you might clear $180, $190 in a good year. Mr. Pettigrew clears $660. You are not angry. The board views the gap the way it views the grass and the sky and the wind, flat, fixed, and historically uninteresting. It has always been that number. It will continue to be that number. The sky has never once issued a formal complaint. There is a word for the logic behind the pay structure, and the word is supplemental. You are not supporting a household, the board reasons. You are a young, unmarried woman accumulating pin money before you find a husband and retire from the profession, at which point the board will hire another young unmarried woman and pay her $28 and explain to her that this is a supplemental wage. The wheel has a confident self-image. Mrs. Draper, who boards you this week, a wide-shouldered woman who feeds her household on a schedule tighter than a military operation, sets an extra plate for you at supper and slides it over without ceremony. She's aware of what you earn. She doesn't say anything about it. What she says is, more cornbread. What she means is, I know, the cornbread is warm, you eat it. The Homestead Act, if you are curious, grants any unmarried woman over 21 the right to file 160 acres in her own name. It is one of the more straightforward offers the federal government has ever extended to a woman in this period, which is a low bar, but still. You know what voids the claim. Marriage voids the claim. The moment a husband's name enters the paperwork, the land migrates to his column on the ledger. The board pays you $28. The land evaporates upon marriage. The century has decided what your options are, arranged them neatly, and handed you the list. None of this is announced, none of it is on the contract. The windows of your schoolhouse are oiled paper, not glass, because glass costs more, and you are not a glass-level priority. You teach the children. Mr. Pettigrew teaches the children. At the end of the month, his salary reflects a man of professional standing, and yours reflects a temporary visitor who will presumably be replaced by a husband before long. You have been here for 2 terms. You are not being replaced. The well is 600 yards from the schoolhouse, on the far side of a barbed wire fence that belongs to a rancher named Doyle, and the path to it is rutted by cattle. You make the trip with 2 tin pails, 1 in each hand, 3 times every morning. The pails together hold 5 gallons. The schoolhouse needs 10 gallons before noon, 1 for drinking, 1 for hand washing, 1 for the stove kettle, and 7 for the inkwells and the chalkboard and the small clay basin in the corner. The math does not work. You've noticed. Doyle's fence has a gap near the 3rd post, which the cattle have also noticed, and you step through it sideways each time with the pails swinging and the wire catching the hem of your skirt in a way that it has clearly decided is funny. The ground slopes down toward the well in a way that is fine on the way out and genuinely treacherous on the way back. You have not fallen yet. The path has opinions about this and considers the matter unresolved. The stove is the reason the water runs short. It's an iron box on 4 legs, squatting in the centre of the room like it owns the building, which in most practical respects it does. The thing is heavy, sullen, and reliably unreasonable about kindling. You light it before dawn with kindling, you've split yourself, in the dark, with cold hands, because the contract does not mention cold hands, and therefore they are your own private problem. The iron takes 40 minutes to warm. The room takes longer. For the first hour of school, the children nearest the stove are sweating, and the children farthest from it are wearing their coats over their coats. The stove does not apologize. Your janitorial duties are not listed as janitorial duties. The contract calls them preparation of facilities. Preparation of facilities includes sweeping the packed earth floor, cleaning the chalkboard, filling the water basin, lighting the stove, and hauling the water to light the stove, and hauling more water for the children who drank the first water, and also, one morning in February, removing a nest of something from behind the woodpile without identifying what made it. Preparation of facilities does not come with additional pay. It comes with the understanding that it is part of the position, and the position pays $22 a month, and no one has found it useful to break that down by the hour. A neighbor girl named Dora, she's maybe 12, daughter of the family you're currently boarding with, sometimes carries a 3rd pail out to meet you on the path, not because anyone asked her to, but because she has apparently decided you are a project worth investing in. She sets the pail down next to yours, squints at the fence like it owes her an explanation, and walks back without saying anything. This happens 3 or 4 times a week. You have not discussed it. It would ruin it. The drinking water goes in a shared tin cup on the corner shelf. All 29 children drink from the same cup. This is not considered a problem. The cup is wiped between uses with a cloth that is also used to clean the chalkboard ledge, because there is one cloth and it has a full schedule. Germ theory has arrived in the medical literature, but has not yet reached Doyle's County, and the cup continues its rounds with the confidence of something that does not know what it doesn't know. By 8 o'clock the stove is up, the water is in, the floor is swept, and you've written the day's arithmetic problem on the board in chalk that keeps breaking at the critical moment. The children arrive in a wave between 8:05 and 8:45, depending on how far their families' claims are from the road. They smell like wood smoke and cold air and, depending on the season, wet wool or dry dust or both simultaneously. They hang their coats on the row of nails by the door. The nails are unevenly spaced because someone counted wrong. Not you. You weren't there yet. The windows let in a grey, oiled light that makes everything look slightly provisional. That's because the windows are oiled paper. Glass costs money the district has decided it doesn't have, which means the room is perpetually dim even at midday, and the children in the back row are doing their reading largely on faith. You've requested glass twice in writing. The board has received your letters with the warmth of men who have decided that oiled paper is adequate and that adequate is a sufficient ambition. There is a barn dance scheduled for the second Saturday of October at the Hoffman Place outside Ellsworth, and every unmarried person within 20 miles will be there. Your contract names this specific kind of event in a specific clause. You may not attend public dances. You may not attend dance halls. You may not attend assemblies at which dancing is the announced purpose. The clause does not need to explain itself. The clause is shorter than the clause about firewood. The reason the board is worried about dances is not mysterious. Everyone knows why the board is worried about dances. A barn dance in 1878 is the only event in Ellsworth County where unmarried people stand close enough to feel the warmth of another person's coat, where the fiddle is loud enough that you have to lean in to hear what someone is saying, where a man can put his hand on your waist and call it choreography. The board has assessed this accurately. It has also correctly noted that you are 20 years old, that you have been in this county for 11 days, and that a county with 5 men for every woman is not a county where a 20-year-old woman goes unnoticed. The dance itself is not a dance. It's a cleared barn floor, a fiddler named Orville who learned 3 songs and plays them in rotation, dried apple pies on a plank table, and men in Sunday wool that has been brushed twice and still smells like it hasn't. The women come in calico, ironed stiff enough to cut paper. The children run under the tables until they fall asleep under coats in the corner. The whole thing is over by 10. It is, by any reasonable metric, a church social with fiddle accompaniment. The board has classified it as a site of moral peril. Orville is the most reliable fiddler in 3 counties. He is 46, grey, and reliably half a beat behind. A square of folded paper arrives on your desk on a Thursday. It's tucked under the primer belonging to Jakob Schreiner's older brother, who is 16 and takes up more of his bench than he did in September. The note is not from Jakob's brother. It's from a man named Caldwell who runs a homestead 12 miles west and who somehow knows your name, your boarding address, and that you have Saturdays free. He would like to escort you to the Hoffman Place on the second Saturday of October. He has written this in a careful hand, with one ink blot near the signature that he has tried to cover with a small additional loop. You hold the note for a moment. The schoolhouse smells like wood smoke and the dried bean smell of the family you're boarding with, which follows you into every room because it lives in your coat. Outside, the oiled paper window glows pale yellow. The stove ticks. 14 children are watching you hold a folded square of paper, and 3 of them know exactly where it came from. Of course, the contract covers this too. You are not to keep company with any man without board permission. Board permission means going to a member of the board, who is most likely Amos Fetzer, the man who sits across from you at the dinner table every Tuesday night because his farm is the current stop on your boarding round. You would ask Amos Fetzer for permission to attend a barn dance with a homesteader named Caldwell. Amos Fetzer would say no. Then Amos Fetzer would pass the salt. Fanny Eisel, teaching in Custer County about a decade after you, received a formal warning when a neighbouring farmer called on her twice in 1 week. Twice. The board convened. A warning was issued. Fanny finished her term, married the farmer that same summer, and the board had to start the whole process over with someone new. The board does not appear to have found this outcome satisfying. You fold Caldwell's note and put it in the pocket of your coat, next to the chalk dust and the scrap of paper where you've been tracking which students owe you arithmetic corrections. You will not go to the Hoffman dance, or you will not be seen going to the Hoffman dance. These are not the same thing, and the distance between them is exactly what the contract forgot to measure. You sit in the 3rd pew from the back of the Methodist Episcopal Church in Mirror Valley, Nebraska, every Sunday at 10:30, with your gloves folded in your lap and your hymnal open to the page missus. Eberhard opened it too. Your attendance is contractual. Your contract names the denomination by name. There is no Catholic church in this county, and there is no Lutheran church in this county, and even if there were, your contract would not have permitted it. Church here is not primarily a spiritual practice. It is a head count. The same 3 men who signed your contract are sitting within 40 feet of you. Mr. Aldrich is 2 pews forward and slightly left. He doesn't turn around. He doesn't have to. His wife takes a careful note of your arrival time, your exit time, and whether you speak to anyone afterward in a manner that runs longer than is strictly neighbourly. The church is the board's second office. It's a nicer building than the schoolhouse, which isn't saying much. The contract's church clause exists because Sunday was the day everyone left their farms, rode into town, and encountered other human beings. The board understood this. The board was not naive. A barn dance on a Saturday night was already prohibited. Sunday service was the board's answer to Saturday night, structured, supervised, and denominated. You attend. You are seen attending. You ride home with Mrs. Eberhardt before the socializing starts in earnest, because the socializing is not in the contract. A woman named Hedvig Sorensen, teaching in Custer County in the late 1880s, reportedly sat through the same hymns 51 Sundays, running without missing once. She knew every verse of Blessed Be the Tie That Binds from memory by October, not because she found it moving, because the alternative was a conversation with Mr. Lindquist about the terms of her contract, and that conversation had a known outcome. She folds her hands in her lap with the quiet serenity of someone who has already run the numbers. Of course, church attendance had a second function nobody wrote down. It was the one venue where courtship was technically permitted to begin, briefly, in daylight, with multiple witnesses, so long as nothing exceeded polite greeting. A man could tip his hat. You could nod. The exchange takes roughly 2.5 seconds and is legally distinct from conversation. The county line between those two categories is thinner than the oiled paper in your schoolhouse windows, and everyone present understands this. The immigrant communities complicated matters further. German and Czech settlers in the eastern Nebraska townships had their own Lutheran and Catholic congregations, and their school boards sometimes reflected that. A Czech board might hire a Czech teacher and quietly expect Lutheran services rather than Methodist ones, contract language or not. A German Lutheran board in a town without a Methodist church had its own arithmetic to perform. The contract named a denomination. The denomination named a building. Sometimes the building was the board itself, deciding what counted, in a parlour with the coffee already poured. You stand when missus. Eberhardt stands. You sit when the congregation sits. The hymnal is already open, and you sing the correct verses at the correct volume, present but not conspicuous, devout but not theatrical. After the final prayer, you shake hands with the minister, who is also a friend of Mr. Aldrich, and you ride back to the Eberhardt farm in the wagon with your gloves still folded. The week officially begins again at dawn Monday. You've lit the stove before anyone's awake. Mr. Aldrich nods at you as you pass his pew. You nod back. The pew is warm from his coat. The boy in the back row is named Caleb Underhill, and he is 18 years old, and he is 6 feet tall, and he is enrolled in your one-room schoolhouse because the harvest has been brought in, and his father has no further use for him until spring planting. You are 18 and a half. He is here to learn long division. He does not look at the chalkboard, he looks at the back of your neck, while you write on the chalkboard. The one-room schoolhouse, by design, contains every age simultaneously. There is a 7-year-old named Ada tracing her letters near the stove. There is a 10-year-old with a cold who has been sitting in approximately the same position since October. And then there is Caleb, in the back row, who has hands the size of dinner plates and is technically your student. The contract doesn't have a clause for this. The contract has a clause for Texas drovers and dance halls and conversation with men of the cattle trade. Nobody on the school board wrote a clause for Caleb, because Caleb's father is on the school board. The room is 18 by 24 feet. There is one iron stove. There is one door. The windows are oiled paper in the poorer districts, which means they let in a diffuse amber glow and absolutely nothing else. No view out, no view in, just the suggestion of a world beyond the frame. The light is dim, yellow, and reliably non-committal. You have 31 students ranging in age from 6 to 18, and you are standing at the front of all of them, and the room is roughly the size of a modern studio apartment, and it smells like wet wool and wood smoke and the particular combination of 31 people who have not been warm since September. Caleb passes you a folded square of paper on a Tuesday. You don't open it at the desk. You open it after school, after Ada has gone home and the stove has gone cold. Standing in the last grey light coming through the oiled paper window, it says something ordinary. Something about the weather, or a question about an assignment, or your name written in handwriting that took longer than it should have. You fold it back into the square. You put it in your coat pocket. The coat pocket is not mentioned in the contract. Your contract forbids courtship without explicit board permission. Caleb's father sits on the board. Caleb's father also sits at the end of the dinner table when you board with the Underhills for 3 weeks in November, which is how the boarding round works. You rotate through the households of your students. which means you are currently sleeping in a house that belongs to the father of the boy you are definitely not thinking about. You eat salt pork and dried beans and cornbread across from a man who could dismiss you on a Thursday and has the paperwork to do it. He passes you the lard. You say thank you. Frontier communities in the 1880s ran approximately 5 to 8 single men for every single woman in some counties, which means you are not imagining the pressure. You are correctly reading the room. The room in this case has 31 people in it, and several of them are 16, but the math of the territory doesn't care. You are the most available unmarried woman within a half-day's ride, and the contract is the only thing standing between you and approximately everyone noticing this at once. Caleb Underhill gets his long division right on Friday. He hands the slate to you without making eye contact, which is somehow worse than when he was making eye contact. You mark it correct with a small chalk tick. You hand it back. Your fingers are cold and his are not. This is not in the official record. The official record, when it exists at all, contains only the failures. Sarah Leach, cited in Abilene in 1872 for speaking with a Texas drover for an hour. Miss H. Walters, dismissed in 1881, ordered to return 2 months of salary she'd already spent. The women who didn't get caught are not in the record. Their folded squares of paper are not in the record. The coat pockets are not in the record. History has very good files on the women who made a mistake. It has almost nothing on the ones who didn't, which is most of them, which means most of them were considerably better at this than the board expected. You qualified to stand at the front of this room by sitting at a wooden desk in the office of the county superintendent of Custer County, Nebraska for 90 minutes, and answering 22 questions on a single sheet of foolscap. The questions covered reading, arithmetic, and the capital cities of the states then admitted to the Union. The superintendent graded the paper in front of you. He wrote the word qualified at the top, in pencil. He handed you a certificate and a contract on the same afternoon. The certificate is the size of a dinner napkin. It has a border of small eagles. It says nothing about classroom management, nothing about handling a 14-year-old boy who outweighs you by 40 pounds, and nothing about lighting a cast-iron stove in the dark with cold hands and damp kindling. Those competencies were assumed. The certificate covers reading and the capital cities. The rest, apparently, you'll work out. The 22 questions are basically the Costco membership application, except the prizes being legally responsible for 32 children, 1 stove, and a bucket that has been leaking since October. The arithmetic section asked you to calculate the interest on a loan and the area of a parallelogram. The geography section asked you to name the capital of Oregon. You named it, Salem. That's the whole qualification. The superintendent, small, neat, and reliably uninterested, didn't ask whether you'd ever stood in front of a room of people and spoken out loud. He didn't ask because he assumed you hadn't, and that was fine. Most of the women who passed this exam were 17 or 18. A few were 19. Some had been students in the same county system 8 months earlier, sitting on the other side of the desk. The transition from student to teacher in Custer County was less a career arc and more a lateral move across the same room. Now, the contract arrives with the certificate, folded once down the center. Mr. Dennison, the superintendent, doesn't read it aloud. He sets it in front of you and waits. You read it yourself. The marriage clause is on page 2. The bedtime, 8 p.m., in writing, is on page 2 also, approximately 4 lines below the marriage clause, as if the two were related concerns requiring equal administrative weight. They are, apparently, related concerns requiring equal administrative weight. You sign at the bottom. The pen scratches. There's a woman named Clara Pratt who took this same exam in Custer County in 1886, 3 years before you. She passed with a score of 18 out of 22. She missed the capital of Rhode Island, Providence, which is a reasonable thing to miss, and got 2 arithmetic questions wrong. The superintendent wrote qualified in pencil on her paper too. She taught for 2 years. She was 19 when she signed. The contract she signed specified church attendance, no alcohol, no dance halls, no keeping company with men without explicit board permission. She signed all of it. She had never read a contract before. She was 19. Clara Pratt sits for the exam on a Tuesday. By the following Monday, she is standing at the front of a room, managing a stove, managing 30 children, managing the knowledge that the man on the school board who can dismiss her will be at her dinner table on Thursday because she boards with his family this month. She has been the teacher for 11 days. The certificate is still in her bag. The eagles on the border are small and determined looking, like they also passed a brief exam and are committed to their new role. You recognize the expression. The exam didn't prepare you for the stove or the contract or the dinner table. It prepared you to name Salem, and here you are. It is the last Friday of the term, and the schoolhouse is full of parents, grandparents, older siblings, and 3 members of the school board, and they are all watching you. The children recite in turn the poems you have taught them. The Macready boy stumbles on the 3rd stanza. You mouth the next line. The exhibition lasts 90 minutes. At the end of it, the chairman of the board stands up and shakes your hand, and the same hand will sign your dismissal authorization in 11 weeks. The end-of-term exhibition is the closest thing the Frontier Schoolhouse has to a performance review, a graduation ceremony, and a county fair, all compressed into a single Friday evening. The parents bring food. Dried apple pies, roasted corn, smoked meat, cornbread cut into squares and stacked on a cloth. Someone's grandmother has produced a crock of something that smells like it was put up in October and has been reconsidering that decision ever since. The room, which seats 32 children during school hours, now contains perhaps 60 adults, and the iron stove in the centre has opinions about all of them. Tonight is your one public moment. For the past 4 months you've arrived before dawn, lit that stove with cold hands, hauled water, swept packed earth, and managed 32 children across 6 grade levels in a room roughly the size of a generous living room. Nobody watched any of that. Tonight they're watching. Mrs. Elspeth Greer in particular is watching, careful, exacting, and reliably unsurprised. A woman named Mrs. Elspeth Greer, wife of school board member and general dry goods merchant Orville Greer, stations herself near the food table and compliments your posture with the warmth of someone conducting a structural inspection. She refills her own plate twice. She does not offer you any. The children perform well, mostly. The Anderson girls, both of them, recite their geography lesson in accented English that still carries some of their mother's Swedish syllables at the edges, and the room goes quietly attentive in the way rooms do when something is genuinely moving and nobody wants to admit it. The oldest Kowalski boy, who is 17 and taller than you by 4 inches and has been testing the outer boundary of your authority since September, recites a verse from Longfellow without error, and then sits down with an expression that suggests he is also aware this is probably the nicest thing he has done all year. Of course, the school board members are not here only for the poetry. They're here to assess the investment. The contract runs through late spring. The question of whether you'll be renewed hangs over the dried apple pie like a weather system. You pour coffee for the chairman's wife. She tells you the schoolhouse smells better than last year's teacher left it. This is the highest praise available. The folded paper notes have stopped. For tonight, the drover who sat in his saddle on the road past the schoolhouse 3 Tuesdays running is not in this room. This room is the board's room, and everyone understands the geography. The territory outside the exhibition is yours, or was, or could be. The territory inside it belongs entirely to the men with the handshakes. What the exhibition can't touch is the thing you actually know, which is that you have taught 32 children to read better than they could in September, that the Macready boy who stumbled on the 3rd stanza could not read at all in October, and that the Anderson girls now write their sums in columns without prompting. None of this appears in the board's records. The records contain 2 things: your salary disbursements and any citations. You've earned the first, you've avoided the second. For now, that's the whole of your professional biography. The exhibition ends. Someone extinguishes 2 of the lamps. The families collect their children and their crockpots and their grandmothers. The chairman of the board shakes your hand again on the way out, which means he has now shaken it twice in one evening, which is twice more than he shook it at any point during the term. Outside, the prairie dark comes in fast and total. The stove ticks as it cools. The oiled paper windows hold nothing back except the wind. On Wednesday afternoon, while you are bent over the bench in the corner sharpening the pencils with a small jackknife, a folded square of paper appears beside your left elbow. You do not see the hand that placed it there. The square is the size of a postage stamp. It has been folded 4 times. The schoolhouse contains 31 children and 1 open door. You slide the square into the cuff of your sleeve without looking at it. You will read it after dark, with the lamp turned low, under the quilt. The note is from someone old enough to know what he's doing, not a 7-year-old with a question about long division. The older boys in the room, 16, 17, some of them 19, have been watching you teach their younger siblings since September. You are 20. The geometry of this room has always been slightly complicated. The note probably says very little. A name, a time, a place, maybe a question phrased as a statement, which is a form of courage specific to the frontier and the semi-literate. The paper itself has done the difficult work. It has crossed 12 feet of packed earth floor, quiet, careful, and reliably unobserved, without being noticed by a single one of 31 children, which is frankly a better logistical performance than most of your Tuesday arithmetic lessons. The contract says you may not keep company with any man without board permission. Board permission means submitting the request to Elias Pryor, who farms the northeast quarter section, and waiting for him to discuss it with the other two members at a time and place not disclosed to you. Elias's answer is structurally always no. Elias is 54. Elias has been on the board since 1869 and has approved exactly one courtship request, which was his nephew's, and yet the notes keep moving. A square of folded paper passes hand to elbow, elbow to cuff, cuff to sleeve, sleeve to quilt. Nobody invented this system. It simply grew, the way frontier infrastructure tends to, out of necessity and the complete absence of anything better. The note travels the same 12 feet, the mail travels 300 miles. Carefully, without announcement, Fanny Eisel, teaching in Custer County in the late 1880s, received calls from a neighboring farmer twice in 1 week. Not letters, calls. He rode to the boarding house, knocked on the front door, and stood there in his good coat while her host family watched from the kitchen. Twice, in 1 week. The board issued a formal warning. Fanny finished her term, then married him the same summer. The paper, in her case, was a man on a horse. The principle was identical. The boarding family notices everything. Mrs. Gruber, who has been patching your flour sack quilt since October and knows exactly which corner you sleep in, sets your supper down and doesn't comment on the fact that you came in from the schoolhouse with your left sleeve pressed flat against your wrist. She is not blind. She is also not Elias Pryor. This distinction matters enormously. She refills your coffee cup and returns to the stove with the focused neutrality of someone who has decided, firmly, not to have seen anything. There is a whole secondary economy of selective blindness operating in this community. The women who board you, the older girls who pass you a wrapped bundle at the church door, the neighbour who leaves her garden gate unlatched on Sunday evenings, none of this appears in any school board record. The board records what it can see. The community has arranged with considerable precision what the board can see. The note under the quilt says Thursday. It says the Hendersons' barn, after 7. You read it twice, then hold the corner of it against the lamp until it catches. You have been in bed, officially, since 8. The lamp is low. The quilt smells like wood smoke and rendered lard and the specific straw of this particular mattress, which has opinions about lower back support. You think about Thursday. The note is already ash. There are 412 unmarried men of marriageable age in Powder River County, Montana, in the spring of 1882, and there are 58 unmarried women, and one of those women is you. You did not generate this ratio. The ratio is a function of homesteading, of the cattle trade, of the army, of the railroad surveys, and of the simple, unromantic geography of who agrees to come out here and who does not. You sit at the front of a classroom in a town that contains 7 saloons and 1 Methodist church. 7 to 1 feels like being watched when you walk to the well. Not menacingly, at least, not usually. Just watched, the way a hawk watches a field, patient, hungry, and reliably unblinking. You haul the bucket back to the schoolhouse at 6:30 in the morning, and there are already 2 men across the road finding reasons to be standing near a fence post. They have been up since 4. They are in no particular hurry. The fence post is not the real project. The census takers who recorded these numbers were doing arithmetic. You are living inside it. The 1880 analysis of Montana territory put the ratio in some districts at 5 to 8 single men for every single woman, and that number doesn't distinguish between the ones who want to marry you with honourable intentions and the ones who want to marry you because you are the closest approximation of a homestead partner in a county the size of some European nations. Both of those categories are looking at you during Sunday services. Both of them know your boarding schedule. It isn't flattering so much as it is logistical. The school board's courtship rules can briefly look, in this light, like they might be protecting you, briefly. The contract clause forbidding male company without explicit board permission puts your romantic life in writing as a matter of public infrastructure, which it is. Half the men asking board member Elias Pruitt for permission to call on you are his neighbours. One of them lent him a plough horse in October. Elias is going to weigh that plough horse very carefully against whatever he thinks of you staying up past 8 o'clock talking to its owner. The plough horse is named Bess. She is 14 years old and not in dispute. Meanwhile, the mathematics of the frontier are doing their own calculations. You are 21 years old and possess all the qualifications considered essential in 1882. You can read, you can subtract, and you are here. A rancher named Donahue starts showing up at the Hofstetter farm on the Wednesdays you board there, arriving after supper with what he describes as fence business. Mrs. Hofstetter pours him coffee. She pours it slow. She is not going to say anything to the board, because the board is her brother-in-law and her brother-in-law has enough opinions. Donahue doesn't say much. He sits across the table with his hat in his hands and occasionally asks about the children's progress in long division, which is not a question he has ever cared about before in his life. You answer it. You answer it thoroughly. You take nearly 8 minutes. The lamp is burning low, and neither of you remarks on this. Of course, not all 412 men have Donahue's patience. Some of them write letters. You receive 3 in a single week in March, addressed to the schoolhouse in care of you, sealed with wax because the sender wanted to suggest seriousness without actually demonstrating it. One of them you don't know at all. He has heard of you from a man who attended your November exhibition and apparently described you in terms that don't match how you think of yourself. The letter is earnest and specific and contains an inventory of his livestock that runs to a full paragraph. He has 4 mules. He would like you to know about the mules up front. You put the letters in your trunk, under the spare apron, where the contract doesn't specifically prohibit letters from being stored. The contract covers your behaviour. Your trunk is, technically, still yours. You are 21 years old. You earn $28 a month in scrip redeemable at Hofstetter's General, and you are operating inside a ratio that frontier newspapers called a demographic opportunity, and that you call Tuesday. It is the last week of July in Dodge City, Kansas, and the herd has just been delivered to the railroad pens, and the drovers, 53 of them, have just been paid in coin for 90 days of work. They are walking up Front Street in their best shirts. The schoolhouse sits on the north side of the Arkansas River, deliberately. You can hear, from the schoolhouse porch, the piano in the Long Branch beginning to play. School lets out at 3. The drovers are paid at 5. The Arkansas River is not wide. It is not deep. It is not, by any measurement, a serious obstacle. The school board placed the schoolhouse north of it anyway, because geography can do the work that a contract clause sometimes cannot. Front Street has the saloons. The North Bank has you. Everyone understands the arrangement. The river does not care either way. 53 paid drovers after 90 days on the Chisholm Trail look sunburned, hungry, and reliably ready to spend. They are carrying coin that burns in their pockets with the specific urgency of money they have not yet had a chance to spend. They smell of cattle and distance. They are, on average, 19 to 24 years old. One of them spots you on the schoolhouse porch and adjusts his hat. You are 19. You do not adjust anything. You go inside. Sarah Leach does not go inside fast enough. It is 1872, and she is teaching in Abilene. Different city, same arithmetic, and a Texas drover stops to talk to her outside the Drover's Cottage Hotel, and the conversation lasts over an hour, and the Abilene School Board finds out because, on the frontier, someone always finds out. The formal citation reads, observed in conversation with a Texas drover for a period exceeding 1 hour. The period is specified. The hour is the offence. 61 minutes would presumably have been fine. This is where the contract earns its keep. Your contract bans dance halls. It bans courtship without board permission. It bans alcohol, tobacco, late nights, and any behaviour the board collectively decides is incompatible with your role as a moral exemplar for children who will grow up to be exactly like the board members who wrote the contract. The Long Branch is specifically what the dance hall clause was written for. The board knows this, you know this, the piano knows this, and it plays anyway. Ford County records show at least 3 teachers dismissed between 1876 and 1885, Two of those dismissals name, explicitly, romantic associations with cattle trade men. The third record is less specific. The third teacher knew what she was doing. You read these records the way you read a weather report, not with surprise, but with the focused attention of someone deciding whether to bring a coat. A drover named, let's say Calhoun, because the records don't give you his first name, leaves a folded square of paper at the general store addressed to the schoolteacher. The store owner hands it to you the next morning along with the salt pork your boarding family ordered. He does not say anything. He does not have to. He will mention it to his wife. His wife will mention it to Mrs. Garfield. Mrs. Garfield attends church with two members of the school board. The note says the dance at the Zimmerman barn is Saturday. The note asks if you will come. The note has 4 words of actual content and has already generated more community infrastructure than most municipal projects. You don't go, or you go and you are careful. Or you go and you are not careful enough, and in September there is a meeting and your contract is not renewed, and the board hires a 20-year-old from Larned who will be gone by February when she marries a wheat farmer, and the whole thing starts again. The frontier has a high turnover rate in school teachers. The frontier is not puzzled by this. There is a paragraph in the minutes of the Abilene School Board for the meeting of November 14, 1872, that names you. The paragraph reports that you were observed, on the previous Saturday, at the Drover's Cottage Hotel, in attendance at an event described as a dance. The paragraph reports that you were observed in conversation with a Texas drover for a period exceeding 1 hour. The paragraph does not name the drover. The paragraph names you. The next paragraph terminates your contract. The observer is not a constable. It isn't a hired inspector. It's someone who was also at the drover's cottage, also on Saturday, also watching the dance, present, patient, and reliably attentive. Someone who recognized you, noted the time, and carried the information to a meeting 11 days later with enough precision to submit it in formal minutes. The board member who reported you might have nodded at you over the salt pork at Sunday supper the week before. He had that kind of access. The Drover's Cottage Hotel sits on the wrong side of the equation. It hosted cattle buyers, trail bosses, and the men who followed the herds north from Texas, men who had money, however briefly, and nowhere particular to spend it except on something that involved music and a woman who wasn't tired yet. The dance itself isn't illegal. It isn't even technically forbidden by your contract, which bans dance hall attendance. The Drover's Cottage isn't a dance hall. It's a hotel. The board decides this distinction doesn't apply. 1 hour is the specific problem. Less than an hour might have been forgiven as social necessity. A young woman can't reasonably flee every room a drover enters. 1 hour is a choice. The board minutes understand this. The board minutes have clocked it. A clerk named Aldous Pemberton, or someone very like him, transcribes the paragraph in his careful hand, the ink a little thick on the capital letters, the period at the end of your name landing with no particular weight. He's been doing these minutes for 4 years. He writes the same way whether the board is discussing the stovepipe repair or terminating a contract. The indifference is not personal. It's just the format. What the minutes don't record, whether you knew someone was watching, whether the conversation was cordial or charged. Whether the drover had a name you already knew or one you were learning for the first time while the fiddle played something from Missouri. Whether you danced or only watched or only talked, your back straight and your hands folded, because you understood the arithmetic of being looked at in a room like that one. The contract's dance clause exists because the board understands exactly what dancing is for. It's not about the music. It's about the bodies in proximity and the negotiations that follow when the song ends. Prohibiting the dance hall is the same as prohibiting the conversation that starts there. 1 hour with a drover at the drover's cottage is, in the board's reading, the dance hall with extra steps. You are dismissed. The word used in the minutes is probably released. Boards prefer released. It sounds chosen rather than punished, which is its own kind of fiction, but the minutes have a format and the format has preferences. What happens next is not in the minutes. Whether you found another district, filed for a new position in the spring, or simply let the contract lapse and moved somewhere the Abilene Board's paperwork couldn't follow you, none of that gets transcribed. The record contains only your failure, not whatever came after it. The drover's name remains unwritten. Yours stays. A man named Augustus Mueller drives his wagon to the front gate of your boarding house twice in the same week. in the late afternoon, with his hat in his hand and a small basket of apples on the bench beside him. He does not come up the path. He waits at the gate. Your landlady receives the apples. Your landlady tells you, in the kitchen, that a Mr. Mueller has called. By Sunday afternoon, the chairman of the school board has been informed that a Mr. Mueller has called twice. This is the entire architecture of frontier courtship. The man at the gate, the apples as the opening move, the landlady as the relay station. The school board as the final recipient of information it did not ask for, and absolutely did ask for. You are not present for any of it except the kitchen report, delivered between supper and the washing up, in a tone that is neither warning nor congratulation. Just facts. Mr. Mueller, twice. Apples. Your contract specifies that you may not keep company with any man without the express permission of the board. Permission is not a form. It's not a hearing. It's a conversation between men at the feed store or the church steps, where your name is used as a noun and your judgment is not consulted. The process is less structured than a modern HOA, which is saying something, because at least an HOA sends a letter. The apples are a calculation. Augustus Mueller is not a romantic fool. He is patient, deliberate, and reliably specific. He has a quarter section, a winter coming, and an understanding of exactly how visible a wagon at a gate is. He doesn't knock on the door because knocking on the door would be a violation. He doesn't send a note because a note leaves evidence of content. He sends apples, which are food, which are neighbourly, which are technically nothing. The apples have done their work and remained innocent. They're in a basket on your landlady's counter right now, completely unincriminated. Meanwhile, Helga Lindquist, your landlady, whose husband is on the school board and whose kitchen table is your entire domestic life, sets one apple on your supper plate, without comment. The apple sits there next to the salt pork and the cornbread and does not say anything, but it has a position. Your situation is this. You are 21 years old. You are in your second term. You have passed your county examination in reading and arithmetic and basic geography, which qualifies you to be legally responsible for 30 children and also to be governed, in your private life, by a committee of farmers who have decided that conversation is a controlled substance. You earn $26 a month. You board in rotation, which means every 3 weeks you pack your trunk and move to the next family. You haven't had a room that was yours for longer than 3 weeks since September. You sleep on a straw mattress under a quilt pieced from flour sacks. Bedtime is 8 o'clock, in writing. Augustus Mueller comes a third time. He times it for a Saturday, when the school board chairman is 12 miles west attending to a sick horse. He comes up the path. He removes his hat. He asks Helga if the schoolteacher might like to walk to the fence line, just to the fence line, to see the pasture. Helga says she will ask. Helga does not ask. Helga tells you while handing you a dish towel, facing the window, that he is standing in the yard and he has very clean boots for a Saturday. You go to the fence line. You are at the fence line for 22 minutes. You discuss the weather, which was genuinely terrible this week, and the condition of the road south, and whether the Engel family's youngest has recovered from his cough, which he has. At no point does Augustus Mueller say anything that could be read into a school board minute. He is very careful. So are you. You're both fluent in the language of things that are technically nothing. You return to the house. The dish towel is where you left it. Helga is still at the window. She says nothing. The apple on your plate from 3 days ago is gone, but there are 4 more in the basket on the counter, and the basket is sitting in a slightly more prominent location than it was this morning. The board meets on Thursday. You were married in Pawnee County on a Saturday morning in September, in the parlour of a justice of the peace named Caldwell, and you returned to your boarding house in Republic County on the same evening with the same maiden name signed in the same ledger. Your husband took the wagon back to his homestead, 16 miles east. You have a marriage certificate folded inside the lining of your carpet bag. You have a school term that runs through April. You will see your husband twice before then, in the dark, with the lamp out. You are not alone in this arrangement. Somewhere in Custer County, a woman named Fanny Isley finished her term and married the neighbouring farmer the same summer she'd been formally warned about him. Somewhere in Saline County, Miss H. Walters married a farmer named J.B. Marsh and kept it quiet right up until she didn't, at which point the board dismissed her and asked for 2 months of salary back. The salary she had already spent on flour and lamp oil and the occasional stamp. The board had opinions about the stamp too, probably. The mechanics of your particular solution are not complicated. You teach under your maiden name because your maiden name is on the contract. The contract is with a woman named after your father, so that is who you are until April. Your husband, 16 miles east, is filing on 160 acres under the Homestead Act in his own name, which is now also legally your name, which you are not using. Marriage transferred the claim. You understood this before the ceremony. You made the calculation anyway. The carpetbag travels with you between boarding households every few weeks, which means it is the only private space you have. The certificate is in the lining, past the seam you opened with a button hook and restitched with the same thread. The bag itself is small, brown, and reliably uninteresting, showing wear at the corners, and it has a small brass clasp that sticks unless you press it from the left. Nobody has any reason to press it from the left. The bag sits at the foot of whatever borrowed bed you're sleeping in this week, under a quilt patched from flour sacks, and it does not announce itself. The boarding household this rotation belongs to a woman named Mrs. Prouty, who is the wife of the man on the school board who handles dismissals. She fries salt pork for breakfast and does not ask questions, which is either generosity or strategy, and you've decided not to determine which. Her eldest son is 14 and already taller than you, and he sits in the third row and does not give you any trouble. This is a family that has concluded you are useful. Useful things are handled carefully. Your husband sends a letter once a month through a cousin in Concordia who addresses it in the cousin's handwriting. The return name on the envelope is a woman. The letter uses no names. It describes weather, soil conditions, the state of the fence line on the North Quarter. It is the least romantic correspondence in the history of human attachment. It arrives on Wednesdays when it arrives, and you read it once before the lamp goes out at 8, which is the hour the contract specifies, in writing, as the terminus of your day. Your husband's handwriting is slightly right-tilted and the ink runs thin at the end of sentences where he lets the pressure off. You have noticed this. You think about it occasionally on the walk to the schoolhouse, in the dark, before dawn, when you are hauling the water bucket and the cold has made your knuckles stiff. By March, you'll have $47 in scrip and $12 in actual currency. The scrip is redeemable at Hendrix's Dry Goods, which is owned by another school board member, which means your wages complete a loop that barely touches your hands. The cash is folded into the same lining as the certificate, because a carpetbag with 2 secrets is not meaningfully more dangerous than a carpetbag with 1. April is not far. The term ends with an exhibition, dried apple pie, recitations, the older boys demonstrating their arithmetic. The board will shake your hand and say you've done a fine job. Mrs. Prouty will pack you a parcel of cornbread for the road. You will sign no contract for next year. You will give no explanation. You will take the wagon east 16 miles to a homestead your husband has been building since September, and the name in his ledger will finally match the name in your carpetbag, and nobody in Republic County will notice you've gone until they need a teacher again in the fall. If the board learns of the certificate inside the lining of the carpetbag, the consequence is not a fine, and it is not a reprimand, and it is not a private conversation in the chairman's parlour. The consequence is named in the contract in 12 words. Marriage during the school term constitutes immediate cause for termination. The termination takes effect on the date the marriage is recorded with the county clerk, not the date the board learns of it. Any salary paid after that date must be returned. That last part matters. You don't owe back the money from when they found out. You owe it from when the clerk signed the page, which could be 3 months ago, which could be November, which could be every dollar you've touched since the first frost. The debt doesn't care about the timeline of discovery. It only cares about the timeline of the record. The county clerk's ledger is patient, exact, and reliably unsympathetic, and all of its opinions are unfavourable to you. Miss H. Walters of Saline County found this out in 1881. She had married a farmer named J. B. Marsh in a neighbouring county, kept her maiden name on the contract, kept teaching, kept hauling water before dawn with cold hands the same as always. Then someone said something to someone, the way someone always does, and the board convened, and the board found the date in the clerk's book, and the date was 2 months before the board convened. The repayment demand arrived by letter. She was already gone by then, or almost. The letter found her anyway. The contract isn't a document about teaching competency. Your students learned their sums. The letters went up on the board in the right order every morning. The stove was lit before any child arrived, which you did with your own hands in the dark, which was not in the contract either, but was expected nonetheless. None of that is what the contract measures. The contract measures the date. The date is wrong. That's sufficient. Fanny Isley in Custer County, Nebraska, understood the geometry of this. The neighboring farmer came calling twice in 1 week in the late 1880s, which prompted a formal warning from the board, not a conversation, a written warning, which is a distinction the board found important. Fanny read the warning. Fanny finished her term. The farmer was waiting at the end of it, which is the only timing the contract couldn't reach. She married him that same summer of 1889, and the board had no standing to demand a single cent because the term was closed and the ledger was settled, and the clerk's date fell after the last school day by a margin that the board's lawyer would have found uninteresting. Fanny had done the arithmetic before she let him call a second time. The marriage bar isn't only a frontier arrangement, by the way. A schoolteacher in Pittsburgh in 1925 reads the same clause out of a typed booklet handed to her at her interview. A clerk in Cleveland in 1937 stamps the same dismissal letter. The booklet has eagles on the cover. The frontier just had oiled paper windows and scrip wages instead of a typed booklet. The clause survives the telephone, the automobile, and 2 world wars, and is finally cut down in 1964 by a federal courtroom under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. What makes the frontier version specific is the room you're sitting in when it applies to you. You're at Mrs. Prouty's table tonight. Mr. Prouty sits across from you. Mr. Prouty is on the board. He passes the salt pork with the same hand that signed the warning letter last March about a different teacher, a teacher who is no longer here. He doesn't mention it. You don't mention it. The cornbread is dense and warm, and the lamp puts a low yellow light across the table, and everyone is civil, and the carpet bag is upstairs in the room with the flour sack quilt, and the certificate is inside the lining, and April is 9 weeks away. Miss H. Walters was dismissed from her Saline County position on the 18th of October, 1881, for marrying a farmer named J. B. Marsh in a ceremony she did not report to the board. The board entered her dismissal into the minutes the same week. The minutes contained a second paragraph. The second paragraph reported that the board had, in August, advanced Miss Walters 2 months of salary against future earnings. The second paragraph reported that those 2 months were now considered a debt. The second paragraph named the figure, $46.80. $46.80 was, at the going rate for a female teacher in Saline County, approximately 6 weeks of work. Miss Walters had already done that work. She had lit the stove before dawn. She had hauled the water. She had swept the packed earth floor while her breath came out in small white clouds. None of that appears in the second paragraph. The second paragraph is only interested in the figure. $46.80 in 1881 was close to 2 months of groceries for a small household. It was more than a farmer's hand earned in a month of harvest work. For J.B. Marsh, the new husband, it was probably manageable. For Miss Walters herself, now Mrs. Marsh, though the board's minutes did not call her that, it was the entire salary she had already spent, on the boarding fees, on the church-going dress, on the oiled leather shoes that didn't leak. The debt arrived fully formed, the way debts do, flat, exact, and reliably unnegotiable. No installment plan, no conversation. Just the figure, and the name beside it, and the board's signatures underneath. The board that signed those minutes was 3 men. One of them had eaten supper at the same table as Miss Walters at least twice that term. He had passed her the salt. He had asked after her health. The second paragraph did not mention the salt. The boarding round was always this shape. You have been living inside the organizational chart. Your employer has watched you butter your bread. He knows how much sugar you take in your coffee. He has heard you cough in the night through a wall made of sod and good intentions. And now his name is on a document demanding $46.80 from a woman who no longer works for him. It just didn't announce itself until October. Fanny Isley, teaching in Custer County 8 years later, understood the shape. She received her warning in late spring of 1889, finished her term, and married her farmer the same summer. After the books were closed and the final exhibition had been held and the board had signed off on her last month's pay, the board got its term. Fanny got her money. The farmer got Fanny. Nobody owed anybody $46.80. That's not a loophole. That's a woman who read the contract the way the contract deserved to be read, which is to say, very carefully, in the dark, before anyone was watching. Miss Walters did not have 9 weeks to maneuver. She had August and a ceremony, and a clerk in a neighbouring county who recorded it without asking what she did for a living. The board found out the way boards always find out on the frontier, which is to say, someone mentioned it to someone at church, and by the following Sunday it had achieved the structural integrity of established fact. The minutes were written the same week. The figure was named, $46.80. You sit with that number. 9 weeks from April term end, the Prouty household still warm around you. Mr. Prouty's chair still pulled up to the same table where he passed the cornbread last Tuesday without incident. The debt in Miss Walters's file is not yours, but it is sitting in the same county records as your contract, a few pages over, patient as a floorboard that knows exactly where you step. You read the minutes of the Ford County School Board for the years 1876 through 1885, and you find 3 dismissals for cause, and you find that 2 of the 3 dismissals concern romantic associations with men connected to the cattle trade. The dismissals are dated. The cause is described in a single phrase. The man is sometimes named. The teacher is not. The teacher is identified by her position. The teacher is the teacher of the school in section 17. The teacher is the teacher of the school in section 12. The teacher does not have a first name. The man does. The cattle trade man connected to the first dismissal is listed by full name and county of origin. The board notes his occupation. The board notes, with some apparent satisfaction, that he has since departed the district. The record is not interested in where he went. The record is interested in documenting that he is gone, and that the teacher of the school in section 12, is also gone in the other direction, and that the matter is therefore resolved. A school board record is a ledger. It runs to about the size of a family Bible, which is fitting, large, leather-bound, and reliably indifferent. It smells like mildew and lanolin, and decisions made by men who had somewhere else to be. The handwriting changes across the years because the clerk changes, and sometimes the new clerk crosses out the old clerk's preferred abbreviations and writes them out in full, and sometimes he doesn't. The entries for dismissed teachers run short. Hired, 2 lines. Dismissed, 1. The economy of the record is not accidental. What the record contains: dates, amounts, motions carried, motions tabled, the cost of a new stovepipe for the Section 9 school, a dispute about whether Mr. Alderman's fence line constitutes an obstruction to the road easement, and the information that the teacher has been released from her duties effective immediately. What the record doesn't contain: her first name, her age, her county of origin, where she went, or what she thought about any of it. The fence dispute gets 3 entries. She gets 1. The Sarah Leach citation from Abilene in 1872 is slightly more generous. It names her, it notes the occasion, a social gathering at the Drover's Cottage Hotel. It notes the duration, a period exceeding 1 hour. It notes the man was a Texas drover. The board appears to have found the Texas part meaningful. There is something in the phrasing that suggests the drover's specific geographic origin is evidence of something, and you read it twice trying to figure out what, and you can't, and that's probably the point. He's from Texas. She talked to him for an hour. The record has rendered its verdict. A board secretary named Clarence Hooper, you know his name because he signed every entry for 11 consecutive years, transcribed all of this in a fine, patient hand. He wrote the dismissal notices in the same register he used for stovepipe invoices. Clarence Hooper tips the page slightly when he lists costs, as if the column wants to lean. He dots every I with a small, definitive press. He wrote her dismissal, and then he wrote the next item, which was a motion about road maintenance, and then he went home. The teacher of Section 17 had presumably done something before the dismissal, had taught, had lit the stove before dawn, had hauled water across whatever distance the well required, had kept 30-odd children from burning themselves or each other for the better part of a term. None of that is in the ledger. The ledger begins when something goes wrong and ends when the wrong thing is removed. You're 9 weeks from the end of your own April term. You don't have a name in any ledger yet. You have a position. You are the teacher of the school in your section, and as long as nothing goes wrong, that position will remain blank in the record, which means you will have successfully existed without incident, which is, in the formal language of 1880s frontier board governance, the highest possible outcome. The teacher of Section 12 apparently aimed for the same outcome and didn't quite make it. You don't know by how much. You don't know if it was a dance or a conversation or a folded square of paper passed during a church social that she shouldn't have attended. The record knows, and the record has decided to keep it brief. Mr. Eberhardt is the deacon of your church and also the chairman of your school board, and on Sunday morning he passes the collection plate, and on Tuesday evening he convenes the disciplinary meeting that determines whether your contract will be renewed. The two roles are not separated. He does not consider them separate roles. He considers them two aspects of the same office, which is the office of seeing that the moral order of Mirror Valley, Nebraska, is preserved in the persons of its young schoolteachers. He is 53. He has a beard that he takes very seriously. He sits at the end of the church pew closest to the aisle, which is the same pew where you sit every Sunday morning because your boarding family, the Eberhardts, occupies that pew, and Mrs. Eberhardt has assigned you the inside seat, near the wall, which puts you close enough to smell the camphor on her husband's coat and far enough from the door that leaving early is not an option. You are in bed by 8. You are in church by 9. The geometry of oversight is precise. The board is 3 to 5 local men, farmers, a merchant, sometimes a postmaster, who meet in the back room of somebody's general store or in a parlour, and they decide your salary, your conduct terms, your boarding rotation, and whether a single complaint from a single neighbour constitutes cause for dismissal. There is no appeals process. The appeals process is Mr. Eberhardt's face when you explain yourself. The face is flat, grey, and reliably unmoved. You have seen it in church. It does not appeal. The two other board members this term are Heinrich Vogt, who runs the dry goods and also cashed out your scrip last November at a discount he described as the handling fee, and a rancher named Polk, whose oldest son is 16 and sits in the third row of your schoolhouse and has been, for the past 4 weeks, absolutely unable to stop staring at the multiplication tables. Also, he says, the boards tend to be small enough that everyone's interests overlap. Less a governing body, more a very opinionated dinner table with procedural authority. You eat supper with Mr. Eberhardt on Monday. On Monday he asks how the children are progressing. On Tuesday he convenes a meeting about you. He pours himself coffee from the same pot you used that morning. He has seen your quilt. He knows it's made from flour sacks because he sold his wife the flour. The professional distance is, at best, decorative. A Calfa in a great house has her own corridor. You have a curtain. The curtain is on a rod between your sleeping area and the Eberhardt's second bedroom, and it was hung by Mrs. Eberhardt with the careful neutrality of someone who has thought about this curtain for a long time and decided that curtain is exactly where things stand. It does not reach the floor. The floorboard beneath it announces every late-night visit to the water pitcher. The floorboard has opinions and shares them freely. Of course, the deacon-chairman arrangement isn't unique to Mirror Valley. Across Kansas and Nebraska and the Dakota Territory, the men who run school boards are the same men who run the church committee, who supply the store credit, who hold the mortgage on the land where your boarding family lives. The circle is tight enough that stepping outside it, a dance, an unaccompanied walk, 1 hour's conversation with a Texas drover at the Drover's Cottage Hotel lands on Mr. Eberhardt's desk by Thursday. Sometimes Wednesday. Word in a small settlement travels with the efficiency of something that has nothing else to do. Sarah Leach, cited in Abilene in 1872, learned this. The board's language in her citation is very particular, observed in conversation with a Texas drover for a period exceeding 1 hour, not 2 hours, not an embrace, 1 hour. Someone counted, someone reported, someone wrote it down in minutes that still exist. The drover is not named in the record. She is. You arrive in Saunders County, Nebraska, with a teaching certificate issued in Boston, and the board that hires you is composed of 5 Czech farmers who have been in the country for 12 years and whose children speak Czech at home and English at school. The board did not hire a Czech teacher. The board hired you specifically because you are not Czech. The children are expected to learn the country from your mouth. You are expected to keep the country in your mouth from October to April without contracting any of the local affections. The schoolhouse is a sod building 18 feet by 24, with oiled paper where the windows should be. The paper is stretched tight and lets in a grey, diffused light that makes it impossible to tell, from inside, whether it is morning or afternoon or just a particularly committed overcast. The iron stove in the centre of the room was installed by a man named Václav Horak, who built it himself and is proud of this, and who will tell you so at dinner on your first night boarding with his family and again on your second night, and again at church. The stove works well. This is the best thing about the building. The children range from 6 to 17, and the 17-year-old, whose name is Pavel, is taller than you by 4 inches and has been doing farm labor since he was 9. He is broad, quiet, and reliably polite. He sits in the back row and understands English perfectly and occasionally corrects your pronunciation of his surname, which he does without malice, and which is, every time, correct. You are 19. He is aware of this. You are aware that he is aware. The 6-year-old in the front row is not aware of any of this and has brought a dried corn cob to school for reasons that remain unclear. The contract the board gave you is in English. This is its only concession to you. The rules inside it: no dancing, no courtship without board approval, church attendance mandatory, in bed by 8 o'clock, were translated aloud into Czech for the board members by the merchant Tomáš Blažek before anyone signed anything. You were not offered a translation. The terms were assumed to be self-evident. They are the same terms a woman from anywhere gets. They travel well. Boarding with the Horak family means sleeping in a room that also stores the winter root vegetables. The turnips are wedged under your cot. They do not smell bad. They smell like turnips, which is its own specific situation, especially by March. Miss us. Horakova, Bozhena, though she hasn't offered you her first name and you learnt it by accident from Pavel, wakes before you and has the kitchen warm by the time you come down. She hands you coffee without speaking. She does this every morning with the formality of a diplomat conducting a treaty negotiation that she is confident she will win. The board watches you with the specific attention of men who spent money on something and want to make sure it performs correctly. Karol Novotny, who sits second from the left at board meetings and grows sugar beets on 300 acres, attends the school exhibition in April with his hat in his hands and his 4 children in a row, and evaluates your performance with the focused expression of someone grading a piece of equipment. You pass. He nods once. This is the closest you will come to a performance review. The unmarried men of Saunders County have also noticed you arrived. The frontier doesn't miss a new single woman, not with 5 to 8 men for every one of her in some of these counties. A square of folded paper appears on your desk on a Tuesday in December, written in careful English by someone who clearly composed it in Czech first. It asks if you will attend the Lutheran social on Saturday. It is not signed. It doesn't need to be. There are only so many candidates, and 3 of them were watching to see your face when you opened it. You fold it back up. You put it in your coat pocket. You ask the class to open their readers to page 12. The readers are 2 years out of date. Page 12 is a story about a dog. The Czech community has its own church, its own dances, its own schedule of collective labour that operates in parallel to the American calendar the school runs on. You are not invited to the dances. Not because you are unwelcome. Bozhena would probably hand you a pieced calico wrap and point you toward the door without a word, but because the contract says dance hall, and a barn that happens to contain dancing is a barn that contains dancing, and Karol Novotny has opinions about this that he has not bothered to keep quiet. You are instead invited to church. Church you can attend. Church you attend. You have, in your second year of teaching, begun to file the paperwork for a homestead claim of your own on 160 acres outside the town of Glendive, Montana. A married woman cannot file a claim under the 1862 Homestead Act in her own name. The claim, upon her marriage, transfers to her husband. You read this clause on a Tuesday evening at the boarding house, by lamplight, with the legal text spread across the kitchen table. You fold the paper and put it back into the envelope. 160 acres out here means ground that is yours. Not a boarding family's kitchen floor, not a school board's jurisdiction, not a contract clause about what time you're required to be in bed. It means a deed with your name on it, filed in a federal land office, recognized by the government of the United States of America, which is not otherwise in the habit of recognizing much about you specifically. The 1862 Homestead Act, in this one respect, treats unmarried women exactly like men. It is, on this single point, plain, flat, and reliably fair. You can file. You can prove up after 5 years. You can own land. You just can't be married when you do it. The same census that confirms you are teaching in a county with 6 or 7 eligible men for every single woman also confirms that those men need something you have access to, and they don't. A second claim. A rancher with 160 acres and an unmarried sister or daughter can double his holdings the legal way, which is slow, or he can marry a woman with her own filing, which is faster. The courtship happening across your dinner table is not only romantic, it has a surveyor's logic to it. You are aware of this. You have been aware of it since approximately the second week of teaching, when the feed store owner's oldest son began finding reasons to ride past the schoolhouse at noon. Now, a man named Douglas Calloway, rancher, 42, 212 acres in Dawson County, has been attending Sunday church with unusual regularity for a man whose previous church attendance was, by community consensus, essentially decorative. He sits 3 rows back, he nods at you after the benediction. His hat comes off. It's a good hat. He knows it's a good hat. Fanny Isley, teaching in Custer County a few years south of you, got a formal board warning after a neighbouring farmer called on her twice in 1 week. She finished her term. She married him that same summer. Her 160 acres went with her into the marriage, folded into his holdings the way the law intended, smooth as a surveyor's line drawn at first light. Whether she minded this particular clause is not recorded anywhere. The record only contains the wedding. You think about Fanny sometimes. Not with judgment, with arithmetic. The contract on the kitchen table, your teaching contract, not the homestead paperwork, still runs until May. It forbids marriage during the term. The Homestead Act forbids nothing. It simply reassigns. The 2 documents together describe a window. File now, teach until May, remain unmarried through the proving up period, and in 5 years you hold title in your own name. The window is narrow. It has the approximate dimensions of a 5-year plan executed perfectly under frontier conditions, which is to say it requires that nothing go wrong, which is to say it requires a small miracle, missus. Tilda Brandt, your current boarding host, sets a plate of cornbread on the table without comment. She has watched you read the legal text twice. She has watched you fold it. She has the look of a woman who filed her own claim in 1874 and doesn't need to explain what the clause means to anyone sitting in her kitchen. The cornbread is very good. She made it from memory, without measuring anything. Mrs. Schultz, who lives in the cottonwood grove outside town, keeps 3 jars on a shelf above her stove, and the jars are labelled in pencil on small squares of paper. The first jar contains pennyroyal. The second contains tansy. The third contains cotton root bark, Mrs. Schultz is the midwife for 4 townships, and she is also, in private, the woman to whom the unmarried women of those townships walk on certain Wednesday afternoons, with a coin in their glove and a story prepared about a cousin in Illinois. The story about the cousin is always Illinois. Mrs. Schultz has never once asked about the cousin. She listens to what you actually say, which is very little, and then she stands with her back to you and measures something into a cup, and the transaction is complete in the time it takes to heat water. You leave through the side door, not the front. The path through the cottonwoods is worn enough that it has a shape, but not worn enough that anyone would call it a road. This is the precise amount of wear you need a path to have in 1887. The jars are old, dim, and reliably labelled. Pennyroyal was used by Greek physicians before the Roman Empire had a postal service. Tansy appears in medieval monastery gardens alongside thyme and rosemary. Cotton root bark was used by enslaved women in the American South decades before the frontier needed it. The almanac on Mrs. Schultz's shelf lists all 3 under hedge medicine and household uses. The almanac is from 1879. The almanac is not hiding. Your contract says nothing about Mrs. Schultz. Your contract says no courtship without board permission, no dancing, no alcohol, no tobacco, bedtime at 8, church on Sunday. The contract has opinions about dancing with a great deal more confidence than it has opinions about Wednesday afternoons in the cottonwoods. This is because the men who wrote the contract understood dancing. The men who wrote the contract had never once thought carefully about what happened after dancing, because thinking carefully about that would have required them to think carefully about several other things, and they were busy. Mrs. Schultz charges what you can pay. Some Wednesdays that is 25 cents. Some Wednesdays it is a length of cloth or a jar of preserved plums. She keeps no ledger. The debt doesn't compound. It doesn't follow you to the next township or appear on any school board record. This makes her the single financial institution on the frontier operating without a penalty structure, which is either a business model or a philosophy, and Mrs. Schultz would not recognize the distinction. She hands you the cup with both hands and watches you drink it the way a pharmacist watches you sign for something. Not unkind, not warm, present. Her knuckles are large from 40 years of cold water and rope work, and the particular grip required to bring a child into a sod house at 3 in the morning. You drink the cup. She refills it once. You sit in the chair by the stove, the one with the cracked leg that has been cracked since before you arrived in this county, and you wait. The chair knows you, not personally, collectively. It has held several versions of this specific Wednesday afternoon, and it has never once commented on any of them. It is the 12th of January, 1888, and you are 19 years old, and you are teaching at the Mira Valley Schoolhouse in Nebraska, and the wind has just taken the south wall off the building. The temperature is 40 below. The children are screaming. There are 13 of them. You have a clothesline in your supply closet because the school board has authorized one for the drying of mittens. You take the clothesline down from the hook. You begin to tie the children to it, one to the next. The blizzard of January 12th, 1888, is called the School Children's Storm. It arrives in the early afternoon as a clear sky ambush, a warm morning, a reasonable day, children in their seats without their coats on, and then a wall of cold moving across the plains at 60 miles an hour. Temperatures drop 50 degrees in 4 hours. That is not a figure of speech, that is just what happens. The sky makes a decision, and the sod schoolhouse has opinions about structural integrity, and the opinions are negative. Your name is Minnie Freeman. You are not especially exceptional. You passed your county exam, accepted your contract, arrived before dawn every morning to light the iron stove with cold hands, hauled your own water, swept your own floor, and earned whatever the board decided to pay you, which was not very much. Nothing in your contract prepared you for this. The contract had a bedtime provision. It did not have a blizzard provision. The clothesline is not rope. This is worth saying clearly. It is a clothesline, thin, cotton, designed for mittens, not for tethering 13 children through a whiteout with visibility at approximately your hand in front of your face. You tie it anyway. One child, then the next. You knot the intervals yourself, working your fingers in 40 below wind, which is the kind of task that produces a very specific and concentrated focus, the kind that doesn't leave room for anything else. The walk is a quarter mile to the nearest farmhouse. The direction is approximate. There is no visible ground, no visible sky, no visible anything. Just the sound of children you can't see, and the tension of the rope between your fist and the child nearest you. The rope is thin, cotton, and reliably mediocre. You walk. You count the rope. You keep moving. One child stumbles. The rope holds. You keep moving. Minnie Freeman gets all 13 children to the farmhouse. Every one of them survives. You survive. The schoolhouse does not. The south wall is in a field somewhere, locating itself at its own pace. The story makes the newspapers. This is 1888, and the telegraph exists. And within days, the Mira Valley schoolteacher, with the clothesline, is famous in the way that 1888 produces famous people, which is to say, men across the country read about her and have a feeling, and the feeling becomes a letter, and the letters arrive at the school board office 200 and some strong. Marriage proposals, all of them from strangers, several of them from men who express deep admiration for her character and then describe their acreage in the second paragraph, which is the 1888 equivalent of leading with your salary on a dating profile. A school board member in Custer County, whose name does not appear in the newspaper coverage because he is not the one who walked through the blizzard, opens the mailbag and counts the proposals. He does not send them directly to Minnie. He reads some of them first. This is not reported as unusual. Minnie Freeman is 19. She is not yet done with her term. Her contract still has its provisions. The dance hall clause survives the blizzard. The bedtime clause survives the blizzard. The courtship requires board permission clause survives the blizzard in excellent condition, unbothered, dry. You save 13 children with a clothesline, and you are still expected to be in your boarding house bed by 8 o'clock. She marries, eventually. Not a stranger from the mailbag. Someone local. She does it after her term ends, which is the correct sequence, according to the contract. The contract is very clear on sequencing. The newspaper accounts spread by telegraph in the first week of February, and by the middle of March, the post office in Mira Valley, Nebraska, has received and sorted and stacked 204 envelopes addressed to a young schoolteacher named Minnie Freeman. The envelopes contain marriage proposals. They come from Boston, from Charleston, from Sacramento, from a small town in Maine, from a logging camp in Oregon. The postmaster places them in a wooden crate, You walk to the post office on a Saturday morning to retrieve your mail. The crate is heavy. That part isn't in the newspaper accounts. Neither is the part where you carry it home in the cold, or the part where you set it down on the table in the Sutherland family's kitchen, your current boarding house, week 3, and Mrs. Sutherland pretends not to look at it while absolutely looking at it. The letters are from men who read a 2-paragraph dispatch about the blizzard and have decided, with great confidence, that they know enough. A sawyer from Portland writes that he has a dry house and a reliable income. A clerk from Philadelphia writes that he has always admired a woman of courage. A man from Galveston signs his name 3 times, in case you missed it the first 2. None of them mention that you had 11 students in that building when the walls started going. None of them mention the rope was a clothesline. The letters are not courtship, not technically. There was no conversation at a hotel dance. No folded square of paper passed across a church pew. No farmer lingering at the boarding house door past the approved visiting hour. These men have never been in the same county as you. The school board, which has an opinion about everything including your bedtime, has no procedure for 204 strangers. The board's clauses are precise, careful, and reliably parochial. The contract was written with Elias Hoffmeyer's son in mind. The clause is silent on Oregon logging camps. You open some of the letters, not all of them. The sawyer from Portland has neat handwriting. The man from Galveston does not. A minister from Kentucky has enclosed a photograph of himself standing in front of what appears to be a reasonably sized church, which you understand is meant to be persuasive. It is a little persuasive. You put it back in the envelope. Meanwhile, the school board is aware of the crate. Of course it is. Mr. Dunbar, who is on the board and also owns the feed store 2 doors down from the post office, has been aware of the crate since Tuesday. He hasn't said anything official yet. He will, though. The board has a system for romantic correspondence, and the system is, the board disapproves of it, and the teacher is expected to agree that the board is right to disapprove, and then the correspondence stops. The system has worked reliably on correspondence from men who live nearby, and can be identified by name and reputation and acreage. The system has no jurisdiction over the logging camp in Oregon. The logging camp in Oregon doesn't know the board exists. You are 19 years old. You have a morality contract with an 8 p.m. bedtime clause, a prohibition on dance halls, and a requirement that any male visitor be approved in advance by a committee of 3 farmers. You have also just become the most famous schoolteacher in Nebraska. A reporter from the Omaha Daily Bee has already written 600 words about your composure. Harper's Weekly is considering a feature. 204 men have decided, sight unseen, that you are the solution to their particular problem. A Kalfa in a harem could not have been more supervised, and yet here you are, briefly unreachable. The board can govern your evenings. It cannot govern the postal system. You don't marry any of them. That fact, when you later tell it, tends to land flat, which is the correct way for it to land. The crate sits on the Sutherland kitchen table for a while longer. Mrs. Sutherland eventually asks if you'd like her to move it. You say no. You aren't done with it yet. You aren't entirely sure what you are doing with it, but you're not done. Fanny Eisel finishes her teaching term in Custer County, Nebraska, on the 3rd Friday in May of 1889, and she is married to John Mueller on the 2nd Saturday in June, in the parlour of his sister's farmhouse, with 11 guests present. The interval between the end of the term and the wedding is 22 days. The interval is not coincidental. The interval is the smallest legally possible distance between her last paycheck as Miss Eisel and her first day as Mrs. Mueller. She has been planning this calendar for 8 months. John Mueller had called on her twice in 1 week the previous autumn, which prompted a formal warning from the board. She received the warning, nodded, and filed it somewhere in the back of her mind between October and May. The board recorded the warning as a disciplinary event. Fanny recorded it as a countdown. Finishing a term means the school exhibition happens. Dried apple pies, recited poetry, parents standing along the back wall of an 18 by 24-foot sod building that smells permanently of wood smoke and wool and children. You recite the multiplication tables with your students one final time. You receive a handshake from a board member who is also the man who issued your warning. His hand is large and dry. You smile. He smiles. The floor between you is packed earth. Then the term ends. Your contract ends with it. The contract, the one that specified bedtime, church, no dancing, no unchaperoned company, expires on that Friday like milk, except quieter. On Saturday morning, you are, technically, a private citizen again. Nobody is formally watching your bedtime. The board's jurisdiction over your social calendar has lapsed. This is the window. You know this window. You have known the exact dimensions of this window since September. Fanny isn't unusual. She's just well organized. Across Nebraska, Kansas, and Dakota Territory in the 1880s, the gap between a teacher's final term day and her wedding date follows a pattern that's less romantic and more tactical, less swept off her feet and more weighted out the clock like someone with a very specific train to catch. Some women cut the interval to 2 weeks. One woman in Saline County managed 9 days, which suggests she had the dress before she had the ring, and probably had the ring before she submitted her resignation. The school board saw this pattern too. They weren't naive. They were farmers and merchants, which means they were people who understood inventory and timing. The problem was jurisdictional. The contract governed the term. The term ended. The board had no instrument for what happened in June. Miss Walters, dismissed in 1881 for marrying during an active term, had made the procedural error. She married in March. The board had her on the calendar. Fanny was smarter. Fanny married in June. The board had nothing. The repayment clause existed specifically for women like Miss Walters, who had to return 2 months of advance salary after her dismissal, which is a very specific kind of irony, being charged for time you spent teaching children to do arithmetic. The clause didn't apply once the term was over. The calendar was the argument, and the argument held. Etta Borman, a neighbouring teacher in the same county, watches Fanny's timeline from her boarding room in the Petersons' farmhouse, sharing a straw mattress with the Peterson daughter, Hild, who is 8 and kicks in her sleep. Etta has a quilt patched from flour sacks. She has one window, which is small and faces north. She is 19. She has her own calendar on the back of a letter from home, folded into her copy of McGuffey's Fourth Reader, the dates written small. 22 days is not very long. It is long enough to finish a term, pack a trunk, and stand in a parlour with 11 guests and a man who called on you twice in October. The board records Fanny's departure as term completed, contract fulfilled, which is accurate. It is also the most bloodless possible description of 8 months of very careful planning. Estelle Reel is 24 years old when she first teaches in a one-room schoolhouse in Wyoming Territory in 1888, and she is 30 when she stands on a wooden platform in Cheyenne in 1894 and asks the men of Wyoming to elect her state superintendent of public instruction. The men of Wyoming have been permitted to vote since 1869. The women of Wyoming have also been permitted to vote since 1869. The total electorate is small. The campaign lasts 6 weeks. Estelle Reel is the first woman elected to a state office anywhere in the United States. Estelle ran on school conditions, not abstract reform, not suffrage rhetoric. She ran on the oiled paper windows, the packed earth floors, the teachers arriving before dawn to light stoves nobody had cleaned since the previous winter. The stoves were iron, heavy, and reliably ungenerous. She had stood inside those buildings. She knew what the iron stove smelled like when it finally caught. She knew the county examinations that qualified a 17-year-old to supervise 32 children in a room the size of a generous parlour. The platform wasn't a surprise. It was a list of grievances she had personally accumulated. The Wyoming legislature had granted women the vote in 1869, partly as a strategy to attract female settlers to a territory where men outnumbered women by a margin that made some counties feel like a waiting room with no chairs. It worked, in the sense that women came. What nobody fully anticipated was that some of them would eventually show up to run things. Estelle Reel is not the strategy anyone designed. She is the outcome. The school boards she dealt with as teacher were, as previously established, small panels of local men, farmers, merchants, ranchers, who managed her contract, her curfew, her boarding schedule, and her romantic adjacencies. The superintendent she was running against was the administrative version of the same arrangement, except seated in an office building rather than a barn. Estelle Reel had spent 6 years in that system. She understood the paperwork. She also understood which parts of the paperwork had never once been followed. She campaigns in wool, because it's November, because it's Wyoming, and because the dress has opinions about sincerity that calico does not. She shakes hands in hardware stores and sits in church pews next to the same men who, 6 years earlier, would have been authorized to cite her for a conversation that ran too long. A handshake is a much better transaction. She wins by a margin that surprises the territorial press and apparently nobody else. A man named Elbert Goff, who writes for the Cheyenne Daily Sun, notes that Miss Reel conducted herself with a restraint and decorum appropriate to the office sought. He means this as a compliment. Elbert Goff does not notice that restraint and decorum are precisely the terms her teaching contract once required of her as a condition of continued employment. She has simply changed the venue in which they apply. The women back in the sod schoolhouses read about this. The ones with the straw mattress bedrooms and the flour sack quilts and the 8 p.m. curfew written into their contracts in ink. They don't have much time to read, there's water to haul before the students arrive, but the story circulates. It circulates the way useful information always circulates on the frontier. Passed between women, at the edge of the conversation the men are already having about something else. In the autumn of 1903, the Bell Telephone Company strings a single wire from the railroad depot in Glendive to the front office of the bank, and within 18 months there are 14 telephones in the town. One of them is at the boarding house where you live. One of them is at the home of the chairman of your school board. The chairman of your school board can now confirm, in 3 minutes, and without leaving his parlour, where you went on Saturday afternoon and how long you were there. Before the telephone, surveillance had a speed limit. Miss us. Grundholm, who boards you, might mention at Wednesday prayer meeting that you came home later than expected on Sunday, and by Friday the chairman might have a thought about it, and by the following Tuesday someone might have drafted a letter. The whole process had a natural friction to it, the kind of friction that occasionally let things slide. The telephone removes the friction. You are now observable in real time, which is a significant upgrade for a system that was already, frankly, doing fine. The telephone doesn't change the contract. The bedtime clause is still 8 p.m. in writing. The prohibition on dance halls, on keeping company with any man without board permission, on alcohol, on missing Sunday church, all of it remains, word for word, the same document you signed in September. What changes is the interval between the infraction and the consequence. Before, that interval was measured in days. Now it's measured in the time it takes to wind the crank and wait for the operator in the depot to connect the line. Miss us. Grundholm picks up the receiver on a Saturday in October. She holds it the way people in 1903 hold telephones, at a careful distance, like it might bite. She says yes 3 times and I see once and sets it back on the hook with the gentleness of someone returning a borrowed hymnal. Then she comes to find you in the kitchen, where you are doing nothing wrong. She doesn't say who called. She doesn't have to. The old boarding round system moved you every few weeks between farmhouses, which meant the surveillance rotated too. A different set of eyes, a different set of loyalties, a different woman who may or may not have felt sympathetic on any given Tuesday. You had gaps, not large ones, but gaps. The telephone closes the gaps without moving anyone. The chairman stays in his parlour. You stay in Mrs. Grundholm's kitchen. The wire between you is thin, copper, and reliably consequential. The men in town notice it too. A rancher who might have ridden 2 hours to speak to you at church now understands that the conversation will be documented at approximately the speed of sound, routed through Agnes at the depot, and known to the chairman by supper. Some men find this discouraging. Some men find it clarifying. The ones who find it clarifying are the ones worth watching. The square of folded paper still exists. It's slower than the telephone and leaves more room for deniability. A note passed through the hand of a 12-year-old student who has been coached to forget he delivered it. That has been the technology of frontier courtship for 30 years, and the telephone has not replaced it. The telephone handles the official channels. The folded paper handles everything else. You have always understood the difference between those two systems. You understand it better now. By 1905, there are 31 telephones in the county. The school board meets less often in person. They conduct a significant amount of business through the wire, which means they are faster and you are more watched, and the whole arrangement hums along with an efficiency that nobody asked for. It was, in its way, a very modern solution to a problem the frontier had been solving badly since 1867. The marriage bar that ends your teaching contract in Custer County in 1889 does not end with the closing of the frontier. The marriage bar follows the country east, into the cities, into the consolidated school districts, into the brick high schools of Cleveland and Pittsburgh and Boston. It is still on the books in 1925. It is still on the books in 1940. It is finally struck down in 1964 under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act in a federal courtroom, by lawyers who have never been to Saline County, Kansas. The rule travels well. What starts as a prairie school board's practical anxiety, the teacher will marry a rancher, the rancher will take her 40 miles west, and now who teaches the children, becomes, in a city school district, just a policy. Nobody remembers the rancher. Nobody remembers Custer County. The form still says you forfeit your position upon marriage, and the form has been saying that since before anyone in the room was born, so the form stays. By the 1920s, school boards in Cleveland and Detroit are running something that looks less like a frontier morality contract and more like a full personnel department. There are interview panels, there are character references, there are written policies about appropriate conduct for female employees, and the policies are long. They are not, however, original. A school board secretary in Pittsburgh in 1931, drafting the district's marriage restriction clause, is working from the same basic logic as a wheat farmer named Elias in Ford County, Kansas, in 1878. The logic being, she belongs to us while she works, and marriage transfers her to someone else, and we find that arrangement inconvenient. A fifth-grade teacher in a Cleveland public school in 1935 meets a man at a church social. The man is an electrician. He is tall, soft-spoken, and reliably on time. The electrician proposes in the spring. She does the math the way Fanny Eisel did the math in Custer County in 1888, except Fanny had only one term to outlast. She has a mortgage. She tells the electrician she needs more time. Some women find the same exit Fanny found. You finish the term. You hand in the resignation before the marriage certificate clears. You time it so the board learns about the wedding after the school year ends, and there's no salary left to claw back, Miss H. Walters tried this in 1881 and miscalculated by 6 weeks. The board sent a letter. The letter had a number in it. The number was 2 months of salary, and the number was not a suggestion. The Great Depression makes the bar sharper. Married women are taking jobs from men who have families, goes the argument, which is a breathtaking argument to make to a woman who also has a family, but the 1930s school board is not asking for your response. In some districts, the marriage bar expands, not just no marriage during employment, but no employment if you have ever been married. A widow with 3 children and a teaching certificate applies for an opening in Akron. The form has a question. The question has a box. The box requires a truthful answer. Dorothy Kenyon challenges this in New York in the 1940s and gets somewhere. Other women challenge it in other courtrooms and get less far. The bar bends. It doesn't break. It is still very much a load-bearing wall in 1955. Title VII passes in 1964. The marriage bar is swept in with everything else the law is trying to do that year, which is a considerable amount. In a federal courtroom, a lawyer makes the argument flat and procedural, the way you'd argue about a zoning variance. The rule falls. 75 years after Fanny Eisel finished her term in Custer County and walked directly to a parlor in her sister-in-law's farmhouse and married John Mueller in front of 11 guests. She had timed it perfectly. And so the term ends. You lit the stove before dawn. You hauled the water. You signed the contract that governed your bedtime, your hymnal, and your right to walk into town after dark. You boarded with the Halsey family, then the Volkmer family, then the chairman's sister-in-law's family. You attended every Sunday service in the third pew from the back. You accepted $22 a month in scrip redeemable only at Henderson's General Store. You received the folded square of paper. You did not reply. Or you did, and nobody found out, which amounts to the same thing in the minutes. You taught 7-year-olds and 17-year-olds in the same sod room. You wrote the word qualified at the top of a child's foolscap. You watched the chairman shake your hand at the exhibition. The contract said nothing about any of that. The contract never did. Tonight, be quietly grateful for a locked door, a room that belongs only to you, a bedtime that is blessedly your own business. So now, let your shoulders drop. Let the room fall quiet. Let the lamp burn down. Nobody is currently rotating you through the spare bedrooms of your employer's extended family. You're doing extraordinarily well. Sleep well. Good night.